Right. Hello everybody. This is Arokya Napoleon Raj again to the third day on this workshop. I welcome all of you to this course. Next, in the continuation for the previous lecture where we talked about the calculation of double bond equivalent or ring equivalent, let us see how it is done. What is called a double bond equivalent? The double bond equivalent is the method to calculate the number of double bond present in the molecule, or it may be the value that we get may be also equal to the number of rings present in the molecule, or it is not a straight link to the number of double bonds. That's why it is called double bond equivalent. For example, a triple bond is considered as a two double bond. That's why we call it as a ring is considered as one double bond. Like that. It is taking the CnH2n plus 2 formula for reference. Taking that as reference, it is calculating whatever number of hydrogen that is reduced from it is due to, if one double bond is formed, there will be reduction of 2 hydrogen. If one triple bond is formed, there will be reduction of 4 hydrogen. If one ring is formed, there will be 2 hydrogens less. And from the CnH2n plus 2 formula. That's what, without explaining in detail about each and every one, they have used one single formula to refer that is called double bond equivalent. Otherwise, it would have been very number of double bonds. It is double bond equivalent that you have to remember. A triple bond is equal to one double bond. A double bond equivalent for a triple bond is 2, right? The double bond equivalent for one ring is one double bond. That's what, right? Okay. Without making any further explanation, let us go into the formula. It is calculated using a molecular formula. In order to calculate the double bond equivalent, what you need? You need a molecular formula. There are several formulas, as I said earlier. There are several formulas for calculating double bond equivalent. But I would like to use only one formula for all kind of molecules. I use this formula which work with CnH2n plus 2. Right, in which this is the formula, double bond equivalent is x minus y by 2 plus 1, where x is the number of carbon and y is number of hydrogen. Right, this is the formula. This will work for any hydrocarbon. What if other compound have oxygen, sulfur, nitrogen and halogens? In that case, we convert this into a carbon and hydrogen, then we calculate, because there are some formula. When oxygen is present, you use this formula. When nitrogen is present, you use that formula. Halogen, there are 3 different formulas, but I would like to use only one formula. You can also use that if you are no problem. You also use that, but it may get confused for it. When you study, you will know exactly for which formula is used. When time progress at later stage, when you think of that, then you will get confused which formula has to be used in which situation, and therefore I use only one formula for all situation, and that's why I use only one formula, that is x minus y by 2 plus 1. If oxygen and sulfurs are present in the molecule, you just ignore them and you consider only the number of carbon and the number of hydrogen. The formula will definitely work for you. Okay, if nitrogen is present, then ignore the nitrogen and also reduce one more hydrogen from the formula, right, that we will see in an example. Then we will understand in more clear, right? When halogens are present, just replace the halogens with a hydrogen. If nitrogen is present, you should not replace. You have to ignore that, and additionally you have to remove one more hydrogen for every nitrogen. For every nitrogen, you have to remove one more. That means remove nitrogen and hydrogen. That is, you have to remove NH. how to remove NH for nitrogen. For halogen, replace the halogen with the hydrogen, right? For halogen, replace with the hydrogen, right? And then apply the formula, then you will get the correct calculation. Let us see some of the example. Let us take ethylene as example. The molecular formula is C2H4, in which 2 X is 2 and Y is 4. The number of carbon is X and number of hydrogen are Y. Up to 2 minus 4 by 2, that is 4 by 2 is equal to 2. Then 2 minus 2 cancel out, and the remaining 1 is the result. And therefore, this compound contains one double bond, that we know already. But from the double bond equivalent, this is double bond equivalent. It may be a double bond or it may be a ring. Okay, that. But since we know the molecule, therefore we take it as a double bond. Right. Let us see another example of cyclohexane, where there is no double bond at all in cyclohexane, that we know already. But if you work out the formula for the molecule 6, where 12 by 2 is 6, 6 minus 6 cancel out 1. You get 1, even though there is no double bond. That implicates the presence of ring in the molecule. If there is no double bond, the value may also for a ring, right? This is how we calculate. And then let us take this as an example, acetone, C3H6O, in which there is oxygen. As I said earlier, if oxygen is present, just ignore the oxygen, take only carbon and hydrogen and proceed with the formula. And if oxygen is ignored, this formula you get C3H6, and apply the formula. 3 minus 3 is the number of carbon and 6 is number of hydrogen, and 6 by 2 gives 3, 3 minus 3 is equal to 0, 1. You will get 1, that is present in carbonyl, C double bond O, right? One double bond is present. If you take benzene as an example, it has C6H6. There is a mistake here. Let us ignore that mistake. The second line is copied from the previous, right? Third, if you apply the formula, 6 minus 6 by 2 plus 1. 6 by 2 gives value 3. Up 6 minus 3 is 3 and plus 1, that is equal to 4. Therefore, there are 4 double bonds in the molecule, or 4 rings in the molecule, or 3 double bond 1 ring, or 1 double bond 3 ring, or 2 double bond 2 ring. You can think of any possibilities when you don't know the molecule. But we know the molecule here, it is benzene, and therefore we know why it gives 4. There are 3 double bonds and 1 ring. Okay. And therefore, whenever you get a double bond equivalent that is greater than or equal to 4, you can think of a benzene ring, that you can make a guess out of that. Then we shall see another example with nitrogen. Let us take a simple example, that is ethylamine, in which nitrogen is present, and therefore what we have said, we have, when nitrogen is present, there you have to remove N hydrogen, NH. You remove nitrogen, also one more hydrogen. And therefore, removing N and removing one more hydrogen will give this. Ignore nitrogen, reduce one nitrogen here. This gives this molecular formula. Now you can apply the formula, x minus y by 2 plus 1. Y by 2, that is 6 by 2 is equal to 3. 2 minus 3 is equal to minus 1. Minus 1 and plus 1 is equal to 0. There is no double bond or ring present in the molecule. Right? There is. And then if you take with an example of chlorine, where this is ethyl chloride. Whenever chlorine is present, you have to replace that chlorine with or chlorine or any halogen or any uni-negative ion, whatever it is. If it is present, you have to replace that with the hydrogen. Right? If chlorine is replaced with hydrogen, there are already 5 hydrogen, and one more hydrogen is added for chlorine, and therefore the formula is C2H6. We know what is the double bond equivalent for C2H6. We have already calculated, and the same result you will get. There will be no double bond or no ring here. Right? I think this is how you have to calculate the number of double bond present in the molecule using the molecular formula. The next topic is UV visible spectroscopy. Right? So far we discussed mass spectra, and we discussed the elemental analysis and how to calculate molecular formula using elemental analysis, how to calculate formula from molecular weight from mass spectra using the rule of 13 and the nitrogen rule. All these things you can use for calculation molecular formula. From molecular formula, you can also calculate the number of double bond. These much calculation you can do so far. And we have discussed the mass spectra in detail, right? And it is called mass spectrometry. Hereafter, we are going to see mass spectroscopy. What is the difference between spectrometry and spectroscopy? In mass spectroscopy, because in spectroscopy we use radiations, all the interaction of radiation with the matter, that is called our organic compound or any material is called spectroscopy. It is a non-destructive technique. That means the compound you record is undisturbed, undestructive. You can reuse it for record any number of time using a single same sample can be used for multiple times to record the same spectra. But in mass spectra it's not like this. There is no interaction, but it is ionization and fragmentation. Since molecule is ionized and fragmented, the molecule that we supply is consumed by the instrument, and therefore it is called spectrometry. But hereafter what we are going to see are spectroscopy, in which the interaction of radiation with the molecules are studied, and they are non-destructive technique. Right? Let us go what is called spectroscopy. Interaction of electromagnetic radiation with the molecule. During the interaction, the molecule undergoes several transition. That is, when you supply radiation into the molecule, it responds to the radiation. The response is transition. There are several transitions possible in the molecule. It may be electronic transition, vibrational or rotational, or nuclear spin transition, electronic spin. There are several transitions are there, and those transitions are absorbed by the spectrum. That is called as a spectroscopy, in which during the interaction the molecule undergoes several transitions. The transition depends upon the energy of the radiation. This is another important factor while studying the transition. The transition depends upon energy of the radiation and the energy gap within the molecule. When there is a match between energy gap in the molecule and the radiation energy of the radiation, that particular radiation is absorbed. Other radiations are not absorbed, are simply transmitted. This is called quantization of energy. Only the radiation, that is particular energy match. If the energy gap, the energy of the radiation, if exactly the both are matching, then the radiation will be absorbed or it won't be absorbed. Either absorbed or not absorbed. Partial absorptions are not possible. That's what quantization of energy says. Right? Let us take the electromagnetic spectrum. Let us take a quick review of that, because in all the spectroscopy we are using these radiations. Right? This is the full spectrum of electromagnetic radiation that we know in different categories, not only in spectroscopy, in all the categories we know. Our scientists almost used all the radiations. But I am not saying that every single radiation is used, but all type of radiations are used. That's what I mean. There are gamma radiation means there are bandwidth of gamma radiations. There is no single, and crores of gamma radiations are there. In that, a particular wavelength frequency will be used by one instrument, and another frequency will be used by another instrument. This is how. But anyhow, all type of radiations are being utilized by our scientists for making products, or for making instruments, or for making both for making instrument and making research. Right. For both the purpose, it has been well utilized. For example, gamma ray is used in mass Bayer spectroscopy, where the energy of gamma ray, you can see here, the energy here it is very high, here it is very low, but the wavelength is here very low, but the wavelength is here. All these things you have studied from school, in college, UG, PG, in different field you have studied. Therefore, we will just go through that. Gamma ray is a high energy radiation which can able to break nucleus. That much amount of energy it has, and therefore in mass Bayer spectroscopy the atom is bombarded with gamma ray, where the generation of new element is and it is studied in mass Bayer spectroscopy. Right? In X-ray, there are X-ray is not that much powerful like gamma ray. It is little lower in energy, and therefore it could not enter the nucleus. It cannot break the nucleus, but it can able to excite one s electron. the electron very close to the nucleus. Therefore, it will be binded very strongly to the nucleus. But X-ray can able to eject that electron out of that binding energy, right? That much energy of electron is called X-ray has, and that spectroscopy is called Auger electron spectroscopy. The full story is different, but I'm just saying the comparison of energy. Also, there is X-ray photoelectron spectroscopy, X-ray fluorescence. There are different places where X-rays are used. Photoelectron spectroscopy. Similarly, the photoelectron spectroscopy is where ultraviolet radiations also used for photoelectron spectroscopy. X-ray not only eject one s electron, it can able to eject all inner electrons, that is inner orbitals. It can able to eject. For that, different radiation is used for different energy levels. That is called photoelectron spectroscopy. The same thing can be done with some high energy ultraviolet radiation. That is also photoelectron spectroscopy is also available with ultraviolet radiation. But apart from that, ultraviolet and UV visible radiation, low energy ultraviolet and UV visible radiations are capable of exciting only valence electron. They cannot touch upon the inner electrons. That much only energy it has. It can able to make transition between energy levels. That is the characteristic of visible light and ultraviolet light. Right? That's what we are going to see today. And it also have an infrared radiation, which the energy is much less than UV and visible. It cannot make any electronic transition, and therefore it can able to only make vibrational transition. Because vibrational transition is consumes less energy than electronic transition. That exactly falls in the category of infrared, and therefore infrared radiation makes vibrational excitation. Therefore, for vibrational studies we can use infrared radiation. That's what we study in IR spectroscopy. And similarly, radio wave and microwaves are there. Microwave is used for rotational spectra of electron, whereas radio wave is used in NMR, where it can able to make, they are very low energy radiations, but they have very high wavelength. But the energy is very much less than, therefore they cannot able to make any electronic or vibrational or rotational excitation. But it can able to make the spin flipping of the nuclei in NMR, right? And that's why that is used for NMR spectroscopy, especially radio wave. Apart from the spectroscopy, scientists also used for many other things. We know very well about mobile data, that is spectrum, radar, TV, FM. All these are communicated through air, through radio waves, right? This is a simple introduction about the electromagnetic spectrum, because we are going to study all those things. We are using all these things in different spectra. I wanted to give this introduction about the electromagnetic spectrum. Let us see about UV. It is an electronic spectroscopy, as I said earlier. It can able to make electronic transition. That too, not all the electrons, only the electrons present in valence shell. That is labile, other loosely bound electrons are subjected to, or susceptible to the UV radiation, where it can absorb UV radiation to go to the excited state. Inner electrons are not disturbed by UV or visible radiation, right? What structural feature you can get from by studying UV spectra? What you can get? You can detect chromophore. As far as organic is concerned, you can detect chromophores and isochromes and some other hetero elements, right? What is the range? The range is from 180 to 1100. I am talking about usually the range will be 200 to 800. This is what people say, but I am talking about an instrument that I used which has the range from 180 to 1100 nanometers. Right, the 180 to 400 nanometers, that is 200 to 400 nanometer, is called the UV region, where you have to use only quartz cuvette to record the spectrum, because glass you cannot use, or glass or plastics you cannot use, because glass will absorb at 200. Okay, in this region UV radiations are absorbed by glass, and therefore whatever you use or solvent or the cuvette, all must be transparent towards the range we are studying, and therefore glass is not suitable to study UV because glass itself will absorb. You may not know which actually absorbed, whether the container absorbed or the compound absorbed the radiation, that you may not know if you use the glass cuvette, and therefore you must be very careful. But for visible region you can use glass. That in that connection I am not saying that you should not use quartz. Quartz can also be used in visible region, right? It has that band, that much amount of transparency, quartz cuvette. But only thing is you should not use glass cuvette for studying in UV region. If your study is only in visible region, you can very well use the glass cuvettes, right? Then how do you give sample when you have synthesized a compound? How to give? You give a small amount of substance, that's enough, because we dissolve very small amount of substance in solvent and record, right? Around 100 to 200 ppm. That means a pinch of substance in a big volume of solvent, right? Right, this much concentration only is. Too much concentration will not give a good spectra because of the principle, right? If you have solid, that can also be measured. If your compound is not dissolved in many of the solvent, the selection of solvent is also very important. The solvent should not interact with your compound, and it should only dissolve. It should not interact with the compound, and it should be transparent in the region. Solvent, and these are all important conditions for solvent. If none of the solvent can able to dissolve your compound, then you can also make a thin film and you can study your spectra. In that case also, the material that you are using for making the thin film should not be interacting with the solid and should not absorb any radiation that you study in the range that you study, right? That is another possibility. Therefore, when you give a sample for recording, if you are recording by yourself, there is no problem. If you are giving sample for external source for recording, you have to mention the solvent, what you want, because solvent has an effect. Polar solvent has much effect on the interaction that you have studied in the video that I have provided. You very well know. And similarly mention the range in which your compound are expected to absorb. If you know what type of compound you are synthesizing, you just wanted to confirm and you want to study how the UV looks, then you can give that range, particular range. That would be nice if you get to look the spectrum, or otherwise you have to then work out right. If you don't know about the compound, then you can study the full range, no problem. Later, when you observe in a particular range, you can record it again in that range to see the spectrum more clearly. And don't forget to correct baseline of the solvent for clear spectra. In order to avoid noises in the spectra or unwanted peak, you have to correct the baseline for the solvent. These are the some tips for recording the samples. When you are recording the sample or you give for external source, these things you have to remember. These are the possibilities you have. What is the principle behind this spectroscopy, especially UV visible? Beer-Lambert's law is the principle behind which the absorption is working. This is the formula. A is equal to epsilon Cl. I have used E here. Actually, it is epsilon. Epsilon Cl. Epsilon is the proportionality constant. That is, the absorbance of the solution is directly proportional to the concentration of the solution. If more concentration, then more absorbance. And the length of the tube. Okay, these are all. The length of the tube is usually fixed. That is 1 centimeter. Usually, the cuvette length will be 1 centimeter, and therefore we don't bother about that. It is actually 1, and therefore absorbance is as far as the instrument is concerned, is directly proportional to concentration, because the length is fixed, and it is, I'm saying, right. Next thing I would like to say, information I would like to give is, there is no difference between colorimetry or UV visible spectroscopy as far as principle is concerned. Principle and the technique is concerned, everything is same. Our working also same. There is no difference. But what is difference is, the accuracy is difference. Because for example, if you take colorimetry, you have only a few choice for you select filters. You have only few choice of wavelength that will pass through the sample, only studying the absorption of that particular wavelength, not more than that. But in visible spectra, this option is more. You have a filter ring where you will select a different wavelength, where there is a different filters are available there. But UV visible, we don't use any filters. Instead, we use grating. That means we pass all the radiation that is from the light source, and we separate the radiations and pass one by one into the sample. And therefore, the whole spectrum from 200 to 800 is passing through through the sample, and that is how the UV visible spectroscopy is more accurate than colorimetry. Principle wise, though it is same, but accuracy wise, it is, there is a lot of difference. Then what we are going to study, since we are studying electronic excitation, the electronic excitation in organic molecule are this. These are the excitation possible in organic molecule: sigma to sigma star, n to sigma star, pi to pi star, and n to pi star are the major transition that we study in organic molecules. Sigma to sigma star usually not observed in UV, because it is very high energy. It lies on far UV region. And one more thing, when you study excitation below 200 nanometer, there is one more problem, that air can also absorb. And therefore, when you record a spectrum, whether it is due to the compound or it is due to oxygen present in air, that you don't know. And therefore, to record, to study the sigma to sigma transition, you have to go for vacuum UV. There is an instrument called vacuum UV. But in organic, if you want to, you can study, because most of the compound have sigma to sigma star transition, that is for sure. And in N to sigma star transition, in saturated compound in which there are heteroatoms with lone pair of electron, they are capable of producing this N to sigma star transition, but yet they are also a high energy transition that can be also studied. But we usually don't give much importance for that, but that can also be studied. The two important transition most often studied are pi to pi star transition and n to pi star transition. These two transitions are often studied using spectroscopy, UV visible spectroscopy. Then how UV spectrum will look like? What is an UV spectrum? If nanometer is in x-axis and wavelength absorption in y-axis, then that spectrum is called as a UV visible spectra. Absorption spectra, in absorption spectra, UV visible, this is, the range is in UV visible, and y-axis is in a, right, from 200 to 800 or 1100 to 180, whatever it is in this region. If you study absorbance, then it is called as UV visible spectra. This is how it will look, and usually broad. How can you identify? There will be a very broad, like a mountain. Each peak will look like a mountain, a parabola-like structure. You see, it is usually broad. The reason you very well know, because you have completed UG, PG in different. There are, you can see in Jablonski diagram, from ground state to excited electronic state, the electron may reach any vibration level of the excited state, and therefore it has empty number of possibilities for transition, and therefore almost all the radiations are absorbing in a particular region, right? And therefore there is no sharp. Well, we have discussed mass spectra in which you have seen sharp peaks. And also IR and NMR we are going to see sharp peaks, but in UV we don't get because the interference by the vibrational energy levels of the excited state. That is the reason why it absorbs almost all the radiation in the range, but it will form a parabola, and therefore we will calculate the maximum. We will take the maximum absorption, the wavelength at which maximum absorption takes place. That's why we use usually lambda max. In no other spectra we have that value max, but in UV we have lambda max, because we are getting a band. In that you have to take the maximum value as the absorption wavelength, right? What structural features predictions you can make? You can make whether the chromophore is present or absent. You can predict whether heteroatoms are present or absent. Presence and absence of double bond or conjugation, like that. But what chromophore is present, which structure actually they are corresponding to which wavelength, that is not sure, because every absorption coincide with one another, overlap with one another, and therefore could not be able to predict that. And another important point is, you have already studied Woodward-Fisher rule, in which even a carbonyl compound starts from 215 and it can also end up to 400. It can have values from any in this whole range. Similarly, for benzene starting from 280, depending upon the substituent and conjugations and so many other things, it has several range, and therefore we could not concretely say this wavelength is corresponding to this functional group. That is before before elucidating structure. Once you elucidate the structure, then you can able to reason out why it observes in this region, and you can make many calculations. But before knowing the structure, predicting this particular group is present in molecule by seeing the UV visible spectra is not a simple thing, right? Because there are overlap that I will show in the coming spectrum. Right, but you have another important point. If it is UV transparent, that is an important. That means when a compound doesn't give any UV absorption, that is another important information you get. That means you need not work out any carbonyl compound, you need not work out any benzene, you need not think of any conjugation. These are all for sure absent. No conjugation in the molecule, no carbonyl group in the molecule, no benzene ring in the molecule. This you can surely say. Right? You can also make that kind of observation using when the compound doesn't give any spectra, that is called UV transparent, right? Then by seeing the UV spectrum, what you have to look into? As I have explained in the case of mass spectra, when mass spectra is given, you have to look into the highest value and what is the base peak and what is the fragmentation pattern. That's what you have to look whenever you see mass spectra. Like how in the similar way, how you are going to see UV spectrum? What you have to see? You can see the wavelength of absorption. Is there any absorption? And what is the wavelength of absorption? And what is the intensity of the absorption? That also gives some information. Right. What is the intensity of the absorption? What is the wavelength of the absorption? You just see, and the number of signals. If it gives 2 or more, it will not give more signals. UV usually there will be 1 or 2, 3 or absorption, like that. If there is a bulky molecule contains different chromophores at different in that drug molecules, for example, you can get more. But otherwise you will get for simple molecule get either 1 or 2 absorptions. For example, if around 270, we usually consider carbonyl or aromatic system or conjugated system are present in the molecule. This is what we can make. That too is not sure, as I said earlier, and we know already from Woodward-Fisher calculations, a carbonyl compound can give many, depending upon the conjugation or depending upon the substitutions. It can go up to, it covers a big spectrum, and therefore we don't actually make any conclusion out of UV spectra. But after making conclusion about the structure using other spectral technique, we come back to UV to explain why it observed in that region. For that and to reconfirm, we use UV spectra. And you can study what is the change in peak upon changing the solvent, and you can make any comparison study using UV. That's are also possible. Right, since so far as far as structure is concerned, it is very little important. But you know, the UV is used in almost every institution. There is almost every research institute, almost not all the pharmaceutical industry and many of the industries have UV visible spectra. When it has no concrete idea about the structure of molecule, why are they using? But UV is not alone used for structural elucidation. The application of UV is wide, though it is not much used for structural elucidation. But there are other applications where UV plays very important role. As I said, it can be used for estimation. We have already studied colorimetric estimation in the same thing. Colorimetric you have to do it manually, but UV can also estimate more accurately than colorimeter, and therefore to estimate the drug molecule present in the compound, it is used in QC and QA, quality assurance and quality control department of every industry has an UV. Right, it can also check purity of the compound by checking the absorption intensity of a particular concentration. That will say the purity of the compound, or any extra peak that you get. All those things will check. And estimation, especially estimation of a compound in the drug, these are all very important tool that is used in the industries, etc. There are several. But in research, very limited application in structural elucidation, but it has also wide application in kinetic study. Kinetic study, all the kinetic study uses, I don't say all, but most of the kinetic studies, the researchers use UV visible spectroscopy because with respect to time, the concentration of the reactant will decrease in any kinetic study. The extent of decrease and the rate of decrease in concentration can be easily observed by UV visible spectroscopy, or it can also be used for the same kinetic study. If the product is UV active, then you can also study the same kinetics using UV, where the reverse will take place. As time progresses, the concentration will increase and therefore the spectrum intensity will increase. If you study the reactant, you can study the same kinetics decrease in concentration. If you study the product, the same kinetics can be studied as an increase in concentration of the product. In both way, it can be useful. Right, there are two types of transition, N2 Pizar and Pi2 Pizar. This is an example of a UV spectrum. You can see there is a parabola. It absorbs in the whole range. Unlike mass spectra or IR and other spectra, you can see absorbs whole range. But what is the maximum absorption that we take into consideration for this kind of absorption? If you take this molecule, you can also work out UV Woodward-Fisher rule for this. For alpha beta unsaturated carbonyl is the chromophore that gives this transition. Here you can see N2 Pizar transition is due to the electron present in oxygen goes to this pi system. There is here this is due to that. Right, there is an alkene and there is also possibility of Pi2 Pizar transitions. And you can also calculate 217 to 80, there is a conjugation double bond. It will go around more than 300. If you calculate Woodward-Fisher rule, it will come around 300. For 217 here, this is the chromophore, alpha beta unsaturated carbonyl. For here ring residue, here ring residue, here ring residue, carbonyl you can make. Right, this is. And it can also, you can also show a Pi2 Pizar transition, only N2 Pizar and Pi2 Pizar transition. Since we know the molecule, we can able to explain all these things. This much explanation you can give. But you can also study, if you want to study kinetics for this molecule, you can either take this wavelength or take this wavelength to study the decrease in concentration. You can take anything, you can study. Since we know the molecule, we speak this much. If you don't know the molecule, what we will take? We will consider only there are two absorption are possible. We don't know exactly what is there, but there is a possibility of a ketone. Since it absorbs around here, there is a possibility of R. Like that we can make some conclusions. Right? That's what we can make more. As far as structure is concerned, we cannot make more than that, more predictions. And you have, you can see here different compounds absorbed at a different intensity at a different wavelength, even if it is the same ketone. That's what I say. This is acetone and this is butanone. You can see there is there will be change in intensity and there will be change in the wavelength. Both are possible. You can see here, right? Acetone, but to butanone. It has an hyperchromic shift between acetone. If you take acetone and 2-oxopropanol aldehyde, you get a bathochromic shift. You get a bathochromic shift. Here also you can get an hypochromic shift here from oxanol to butadienone. You have higher intensity. This is what you can study. So different same ketone absorbs at a different range, that you have to understand. Right? And solvent also has an effect. Solvent has an effect, and aromatic compounds, you can see here benzene absorbs in this region, but when OH group is introduced into the benzene, then the pattern changes, and there is a shift in a longer wavelength, right? When one more nitro group is introduced, and there is another shift, both bathochromic and hyperchromic shift are absorbed. This is how introduction of new compounds usually shift the peak in many directions. This is due to the presence of oxochrome. Actually, the para-nitrotoluene, the para-nitrobenzene is giving the signal here. If there is no OH group, the signal would have been low. The intensity of the signal rises here due to the presence of OH at a para position. That is called the effect of oxochrome. All these things you can infer from a UV spectra, right? Here you can see the effect of solvent. This is recorded with this compound benzophenone UV spectra, which is recorded in ethanol. You get this sample, you get absorption at around here 270, but at because it is a polar solvent, it can interact with the carbonyl group and it absorbs here. This is due to the benzene ring, absorption due to the benzene ring, and you can see here one more absorption by in the presence of cyclohexane. If cyclohexane is used as a solvent, you get a different spectrum. Almost you get the same kind, but there is a shift in the wavelength that you have to observe. You can see here shift in the wavelength. That means you can see here that the ethanol, the polarity of the solvent affects the molecule. This is an evidence. These are all things you can observe, right? This is an evidence for kinetic study, and this is how kinetic, different samples are collected for same reaction at a different time. This is at a time 0, it has full absorbance. When this is decrease in concentration is observed, and therefore by seeing this you can see they have studied the reactant for kinetics. So with respect to time, the concentration decreases at time 0. It may be at 15 minutes or 15 seconds or 1 minute, whatever it is. At different time you have to take different samples. If you record all the spectra together, you can get for the same compound, you get this type of structure. This is how they study the kinetic. And with respect to time, you can also take the maximum points value and you can draw a straight line, whether it follow a linear graph, linear, whatever it is, you can study all those things, right? You also know Woodward-Fisher rule that I would like to, when after you find out the compounds and you studied recorded UV spectrum, in the explanation part you can also make a theoretical calculation based on Woodward-Fisher rule that I think you have already studied in your PG. There is a Woodward-Fisher rule. You can make a theoretical calculation and your record spectra, you can make a comparison. And that is an evidence that your compound has been synthesized. That is an argument as a evidence you can put forth. This is how you can also use Woodward-Fisher rule to calculate the theoretical absorption maximum value, and you can compare with the experimental value to prove that your molecule synthesized is exactly the same. It's one of the proof, not the 100% proof. There are several ways by which, right? This is how we will interpret UV data as far as structural elucidation is concerned. UV has much wider applications. Since we are dealing with the structural elucidation, I would like to stop here. Okay, thank you. If there is any doubt, we shall discuss in the next session. Thank you very much. Thank you. We shall meet in the next session. Thank you. Thank you.